Welcome to the December NGA meeting. We're really excited to be able to share this virtual space together and get on the same page as we work towards having a successful assessment administration season. Next slide, please. So we're really looking forward to having more time for discussion today. But before we get started with our content, we do want to remind everyone to please mute your microphone when you're not speaking, just so that we can minimize background noise. That being said, we are going to be really intentional about pausing throughout our presentation today. We acknowledge that our past 2 NGA meetings were pretty packed with information, and we didn't have as much time for discussion as we would like. So we hope that we will have more time to answer your questions today. We will also be recording this meeting. And Michael Craig, our assessment specialist for special populations, has dropped into the meeting chat the sign-in sheet. If you have access to the chat, please complete that form to indicate your attendance today. We do track attendance to make sure that LEAs are receiving the information that they need, so please make sure that you fill out that form. For those of you who may not have access to the chat, we want to make sure that we log your attendance as well. You can email OSSE.assessment@dc.gov, letting us know that you are in attendance, and we will manually go in and update that information. So once again, please sign in so that we can indicate that you are here, and email us at OSSE.assessment@dc.gov if you're unable to fill out the form in the chat. Next slide. For our agenda today, we are going to begin with a brief introduction to our statewide assessment system, and then we are going to dive into some updates around test administration for this upcoming year. Specifically, we are going to review the timeline that we've shared in previous NGA meetings, and then we're going to dig into the assessment training calendar and the test security training modules. We'll then give some updates for specific assessments before diving back into assessment policy. We want to acknowledge that the policy reminders in today's meeting are very much a repeat of some things that were discussed in more detail in the October NGA meeting. So we encourage you to refer to the October NGA meeting for more details around those policy. We'll then close out with some more miscellaneous updates and resources related to assessment and our communications moving forward. With that, I'm going to pass it over to our Director of Assessments, Danielle Branson, to go over our introduction with you.
Thank you, Deanna, and thank you everyone for joining today. It's great to convene with you virtually. I don't know about you all, but I cannot believe that it's December. Time has moved so quickly. So let's go into our next slide. So all of you know, we always start with our mission statement for the Office of Assessment to ground ourselves in the work and why we do this work. So I'll read it, even though it's very familiar to many of you. In partnership with key stakeholders, we create a comprehensive educational assessment program that accurately measures, people are admitting into the room, accurately measures student performance, produces actionable data, and provides tools, guidance, and training to empower local education agencies, LEAs, to meet the needs of all learners and make informed decisions. Always something we want to start ourselves out with, so we're sharing our common definition of why we're coming together. So again, thank you for your time today. So for those of you who might be new, want to introduce this group to all of you. So again, I'm Danielle Branson. I'm the Director of Assessments. I'm happy to be with you all today. I will be your point person for all things policy, all things reporting. And in the interim, all things test security and point contact for NAEP as we bring on some new staff members, which we're really excited about. And Stephanie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephanie Snyder. I'm the Deputy Director of Assessments here at OSSE. Happy to be with you all this afternoon. I am the temporary point person for all things science. So that's DC Science and the Dynamic Learning Maps, DLM, alternate science assessment, as well as backup to Deanna for all things related to test administration for PARCC.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Craig. I serve as the assessment specialist for special populations, overseeing the work for our students with significant cognitive disabilities, our MSAA assessment, our access assessment, and access alt assessments for students, our English learners.
And everyone, I'm Dr. Deanna Santoro. I am the assessment specialist on the assessment team for test development, administration, and education, and have been working primarily on the PARCC side of things.
Thanks, Deanna. Next slide. So today we're going to be talking about our full suite of assessments. This is our first time going back to statewide assessment administration since the pandemic started, and we are really looking forward to partnering with you. So we have a really successful season that of course covers a main NAEP year this year for reading and mathematics, as well as a long-term trend study. Just one school's involved in that. Our access for ELLs, as well as our alternate access assessment, of course, PARCC, MSAA, DC Science, and DLM. We'll be hitting on some of the upcoming activities for each of these assessments throughout the conversation today. And I'll turn it over to Deanna to talk a little bit about test administration broadly.
Thanks, Danielle. The next few slides that we're going to go over are information that we have shared previously. I see a question in the chat about sharing the slide deck with us. Yes, all of the slide decks and the recordings from NGA meetings are available on the OSSE assessment webpage, and we'll be sure to post both the deck and the recording as soon as they are available. We can go on to the next slide. We're going to kick off talking about timelines. So as you can see on this slide, this is our 2021-22 statewide testing windows. I'm not going to read the details on this slide since you can see it and we've gone over it in detail in past NGA meetings, but we do want to note that if you are a school that was selected to participate in NAEP, you have already been notified, and that this year we want to emphasize that the 30-day consecutive window restriction for PARCC testing has been removed. So this means that schools can test at any point in the published window, and we encourage you to visit the statewide assessment participation and performance policy language for more details. We will be briefly doing a brief review of that content at the end of today's session. We can go on to the next slide. For those of you who are more visual or may have some staff members who would better digest this information in a more colorful format, we have put together this calendar as well for your reference. For this calendar, we encourage you to add any school-specific or LEA-specific holidays that you may also have to make sure that it reflects that information before you are sharing it with your stakeholders. We also want to note that this information should be interpretable in grayscale. We were very intentional to make sure that both the color palette and the black and white version of this slide would be something that you could use. Next slide, please. On this slide, you can see one of the many resources that the OSSE assessment team has released for LEAs in schools. This resource specifically is the statewide assessment activities schedule. So on this, you can see that the PARCC and DC Science dates are aligned, as well as the MSAA and DLM testing dates are aligned for 2022. This resource, among other resources, can be found on the Test Coordinator Resources page. And we hope that it will be helpful to give a very big picture view of what is happening during each month during assessment administration for the 2021-22 school year. Next slide, please. Here you can see something that is probably very familiar as it is published annually by the assessment team, and this is the assessment coordination timeline. So this assessment coordination timeline zooms into the specific actions that are needed for assessment administration in the specific order that they occur. It's color-coded by whose action is required, and you can see the key in the bottom corner of this slide. We would like to note that the first three orange squares denote LEA submissions to OSSE that have already passed. those are select LEA test coordinator and submit to OSSE. This was done through a form that was sent out and was due on October 18th. At this point, we have received information from all LEAs, so thank you for that. The next is to determine test windows and submit them to OSSE and apply for alternate assessments, which Michael Craig will speak more about later in our presentation. The next blue circle on this coordination timeline is something that we are going to talk more about today, which is attend OSSE assessment trainings. Today we will be talking both about the assessment training calendar as well as the test security training modules which are currently available. Let's go on to the next slide, please. In the spirit of making sure that you have all of the resources that will support you for a successful administration, we have also put together this coordinating statewide assessments guide. This guide is not meant to replace other trainings or readings and resources, but it is a one-stop shop that has information about all of the statewide summative assessments that you may administer at your school. So the link to this document is on the Test Coordinator Resources webpage, and we encourage you to review this document in the months of December and January so that you can be set up for success moving forward. Next slide, please. This is also a familiar slide. It outlines the roles and responsibilities of LEA assessment managers at a high level. More details of the roles and responsibilities of assessment points of contact are outlined in the documentation on the OSSE Test Coordinator Resources webpage. If you are serving as an assessment point of contact, LEA assessment manager, MSAA coordinator, or access coordinator, please make sure that you are registered in eSchool Plus so that you are receiving all of the communications related to those assessments. If you are not familiar with eSchool Plus and you're an LEA, you can reach out to your school's data manager to get signed up. And if you're a non-public school and you are not yet receiving the NGA bulletin, which is a communication email that the OSSE assessment team puts out every 1 to 2 weeks, non-public school assessment points of contact can gain access by emailing osse.assessment@dc.gov. So let's move on to the next slide. So based on the feedback that we've received, we've been really intentional this year to very clearly delineate the roles and responsibilities of LEAs and non-public schools. We have asked that both the LEA assessment manager and non-public school test coordinators complete the form that is on this slide by October 18th to let us know who the points of contact are so that we can make sure that they're registered in the appropriate systems. Since this is past due, it is complete, but we do acknowledge that things change. So if you have any updates related to the points of contact that you submitted on this form, please fill out the form again and email us at osse.assessment@dc.gov so that we can make sure that we have fully captured that information and we're sending our communication to the appropriate people. So that was a lot of information. It is primarily a review of things that we have presented in the past. But on the next slide, we thought it would be helpful to go into a more concrete checklist of what are the next steps thinking about assessment administration over the months of December and January. So the first next step that we encourage everyone to do is to make sure that you've reviewed all of this year's assessment policy documents. This includes the statewide assessments participation and performance policy, the District of Columbia test security guidelines, as well as the OSSE testing accommodation guides. We also encourage you to read through the Test Coordinator Resources webpage. This webpage has a lot of helpful documents, including the timelines that we just reviewed and the Coordinating Statewide Assessments Guide and testing training schedule. We received feedback early over the summer that there were just a lot of places to have to go to find all of the information that you need. And we have really done an intentional job to make this Test Coordinator Resources webpage be as comprehensive as possible as a one-stop shop for LEA assessment managers and LEA test coordinators. In just a moment, we will talk more about the test security training modules and certification quiz, but that is something that you will also be completing over the months of December and January, as well as starting to create a plan to train authorized personnel on the test security content from those modules. We also encourage that you take some time to determine the staffing plans for assessment administration and review the alternate assessment eligibility determinations in QuickBase and make any appeals to the OSSE determinations by December 17th. And finally, but this is a big one, make sure that you are reading the NGA Bulletin communications. Student registration for our various assessments will begin in December and January. And we want to make sure that everyone is on track for success before we come back together in February's NGA meeting. So for access, that means that you're completing registration by December 10th. Michael Craig will be talking more about this later in our presentation. And for PARCC and DC Science, please note that PAN is scheduled to open to LEAs on January 5th. I noticed that there were some questions in the chat, so I'm going to pause here for a moment to make sure that we have had an opportunity to respond. And if you have any other questions, feel free to type them in the chat or to hop off mute and ask. Yes, we will definitely reshare the sign-in sheet. And thank you, Danielle, for sharing the link to the test coordinator resources page. Wonderful. Well, we will continue on. Oh, I saw a hand raised and then go down.
I can respond to the question of timelines. So we like to have that that flow chart that talks about the roles and responsibilities be an evergreen document, right? So it's the way in which this work will function annually every single year. So you're right, that one doesn't have specific dates on it. How we try to send dates is through the NGA bulletins with our action items really clearly up front, so you see what's coming. We also have another resource that I believe I'll send it to you, send the link to everyone, where you see the monthly lists. You can see generally how the flow happens. Specific dates, obviously, sometimes we negotiate with the vendors and things like that, and we try to share those through the NGA bulletin. There may be a way where we can add some additional clarity to that, and we'll look into that. But the document that you have that is kind of a pretty graphic is something you might want to print out, keep up. It's just an annual flow of information. It's a really good question.
Yes, thank you, Danielle. And I think that that really helps to emphasize the point of the importance of being registered for the NGA Bulletin if you are not yet. I'm going to go ahead and continue on. We will continue to answer questions in the chat as they come up. And we're going to now transition into talking about the assessment training calendar. You can go ahead and go on to the next slide. On this slide, you can see an overview of the assessment training opportunities that exist for specific assessments. We have this information in another form that we are going to show on the next slide that is a little more digestible and also can be found on the test coordinator resources webpage that's linked at the bottom here and that we put into the chat. So let's go ahead and go on to that next slide. When you open the 2021-22 assessment training schedule, this is the document that you will see. To make sure that we're all on the same page with how to interpret this document, I'm going to start over in this first column where it has the training event. In this column, you will see the name of the event that's taking place. The next column has the date and time, and then finally the location. You will notice that all of the trainings that we have for this upcoming year are planned to be webinars, and that the test security training modules, similarly to last year, will be online asynchronous training modules with a certification quiz. The column where it says register has the Eventbrite registrations so that you can go ahead and register for these assessments. This next section here, where it says assessment role, you will see that there are many columns that are divided between the LEA and the school. If it is in red, if it's a red check mark, that means that it is a required training for the individual listed in that row. If it is a blue check mark, it means that it's recommended, although not required, for that individual. And if it is that light gray color, that means that it is optional. We also want to highlight, if you could go to the next slide for us, that we have heard that it would be helpful to have opportunities for technical assistance and one-on-one office hours. So we have put together a Microsoft bookings page where LEA level assessment points of contact can sign up with members of the OSSE assessment team on specific topics to troubleshoot any problems that may arise. The link is right here below where it says training event within this training schedule, but this information and this link to the bookings page was also shared in this week's NGA bulletin. So you can access it from the bulletin, or you can open up this training schedule to book office hours times with members of the assessment team. So I see a question in the chat. It says, where are these at the link above? This information is all on the test coordinator resources page. I hope that answers your question, Heather, but if it does not answer your question, feel free to hop off mute and ask your question again. Thank you for resharing that link in the chat. It's really appreciated. Well, with that, we are going to dig more specifically into the test security training modules, and I'm going to pass it over to Danielle Branson for that.
Thanks, Deanna. You can go to the next slide. So we are happy to announce that the test security training modules are live and have been posted on our website. We have included the link that includes all materials related to test security that you'll need to know. That link includes our test security guidelines, the trainings, associated resources, and will be including updated information on the school test security plan application. So that is your go-to page. We have an overview module that goes through the process for taking these virtual modules, and then 6 required modules for your training. We did hear some really positive feedback when we shifted in-person training, which was if you remember, a very long day. Used to be 2 days, but a very long day, into a self-paced module system. We heard that was really well received. We started doing this because of the pandemic, but I've heard that there's interest in continuing this, and we listened and really wanted to offer that to you again this year. So you do have a self-paced module series that is required and is posted live now. You have the PDFs available, PowerPoints on demand if you would like that. The recorded webinar is what you should be listening to, and then a full transcript if you do need the hard copy resource to use in addition while you're watching the webinars. Next page. So a reminder, which you know from your test security guidelines, that all LEA test integrity coordinators are required to view the OSSE created test security training modules, and they're also required to take the associated quiz with a score of at least 80%. And Deanna has linked that page in the chat. If you're looking for the quiz, you're saying, where's the quiz? Well, it's in the training modules, so you can't just go to the quiz without taking the trainings themselves. So who's required to participate in the OSSE training? Again, anyone at the LEA who is serving as a test integrity coordinator for PARCC and DC Science, for MSA DLM, access for ELLs, alternate access. At your LEA, that might be one person, that might be you, and you're serving in all of those roles, or it might be 3 different individuals, right? It might be one person for PARCC, DC Science, one person for MSA DLM, and so on and so forth. As an LEA test integrity coordinator, you or they are responsible for ensuring that all authorized personnel at schools under the LEA are participating in testing, that they're trained, right? Non-public test coordinators are able to, we have some supplemental materials for them as well, but they are able to look at this as well, yes. Next slide. So just a little bit of additional information about the training requirements here. Some of you have asked if you could use our resources to start developing your own training materials. Absolutely, they're there for you. So please consider using our training materials to help develop your own training. We do know, however, that your LEA and school-based trainings are going to need specific information to your schools. You'll have school-based and LEA-based policies that you will want to make really clear. So we hope you use it as a starting point, but we do know that's not the end of it, right? You'll have specific LEA and school policies that you'll want to be included. One thing, go back on one slide. Sorry, Stephanie. So the last thing, just two notes on the slides you see here that I do want to call out verbally. It is really important that everyone is trained, as you know, prior to testing, but anyone who is responsible for submitting a school test security plan has to complete their training prior to developing their plan. So if you are an early tester in Access, and you want to have your LEA test integrity coordinator in Access, make sure they complete their trainings early on. If you have a later testing window, you can train a little bit later, right? But backmap your planning based on when you're doing your school test security plan. And all of that information is in the test security guidelines, so that's where you'll want to start. We, of course, have office hours to support you in this, in any questions you may have about training, any policy questions you may have, or any specific technical questions you have when you're working through your school test security plan. We want to make sure you feel fully prepared. Now, next slide. Yes, so I see some questions here. I want to pause. Deanna, thank you for responding for the non-public webinar. We will have a live webinar for non-public folks because there's some different policies and procedures there. And I see a question about, is it possible to share the editable PowerPoint slides? Absolutely. You can email us, we'll send them right away to you. You can email me or OSSE.assessment and I'll give you those editable PowerPoint slides if you want to use that material. And we're going to hope to get this posted on the website too. We just didn't want to wait because the webinars were able to be posted today and the PowerPoint slides are also quite large. So please email us if you want copies of those. I'll pause. Any test security training questions you have? And feel free to come on video, put yourself on audio if you'd like. Again, any questions you have as you go through. Oh, one question here from Victoria. Request for vendor provided access TC training to occur in December in future years to allow schools the opportunity to train well in advance of preparing test plans. Yep, we will take that and talk with our vendor about the opportunity to schedule a testing training a little bit earlier next year. Thanks for that flag. We'll absolutely take that. Okay, let's move on to NAEP. So this is a main NAEP year, which means we are doing our national study across the country, with all states participating in our main NAEP program in reading and mathematics in grades 4 and 8. There are also some additional studies happening. As some of you know, we've been working on the long-term trend study. DC is participating, just one school is participating in the long-term trend study with age 9, so thank you to that school for participating. The rest of individuals in grades 4 and 8 have been notified already, and we really thank you for your participation. This year we will be getting both the national data and DC specific data, as well as TUDA level, so DCPS level data. We are really looking forward to seeing how the nation is performing in reading and mathematics, as well as the impact on DC. It's a really critical point in time, so really thank you for your partnership in this. So let's move on to some upcoming details. So preparations for NAEP are just really starting. All schools have already been notified of their NAEP testing dates if you've been selected. And the NAEP testing window is January 24th to March 4th. You have a selected date. I know some folks are still changing their dates right now because they have some conflicts. That is absolutely okay. It's a very iterative process. Really important, all NAEP school test coordinators should have already been entered into the MyNAEP system. Most people have done that, so thank you so much for doing that. There are some stragglers that do not have their school test coordinators emails in particular into the system. So please talk to your school test coordinators and make sure those have been implemented. We cannot have the NAEP representatives contact schools if we don't have emails for the right people. So we will try to follow up this week if there are any concerns, but try to go in and do that as soon as possible. School access to the MyNAEP database will be available December 6th on Monday. So excited that that's opening soon. Schools that have been selected for NAEP will receive contact from their NAEP representative either today or tomorrow. So maybe some of your folks have already been contacted today. Very exciting. The NAEP sampled schools are going to receive an email from their NAEP coordinator, and they are going to get an introduction to MyNAEP for Schools video and instructions for the school coordinator brochure. And so the information they need to start getting set up. This is going to replace the kind of old FedEx package that sample schools received in the past. And I actually think it's a really great update of their processes. Next slide. So this is the specific email they're getting. We want to be really transparent with all of you because you might not be receiving this. It's going straight to schools, but it impacts your schools, of course. So in this email, the NAEP representative is connecting with your school coordinator, just saying it's time to prepare. MyNAEP is where you go. And there are two videos here that I actually think are really helpful for anyone to view if you're interested in kind of the process for registering for NAEP. DBA, you can see here, just means digitally based assessments. It is just the main NAEP program. LTT means long-term trend. So that's only applicable to the one school who's participating. The preparation activities will occur prior to when you are scheduling your pre-assessment review call with your representative. So the next step will be setting that call with your individual person, and your NAEP person is going to help you walk through the whole process. And there's some links in there as well of who you reach out to, as well as the main page for resources. Next slide. So as I mentioned, your representative is going to call to schedule a pre-assessment review call, and you're going to go through prep. You're going to talk about run of show, day's activities, and technical support. When you have your PRC call is totally contingent on when your test date is. So here's a little chart for you all. If your assessment date falls in this window, next column, this is the timeline you have to complete your MyNAEP tasks. You don't have to start in January. I actually highly encourage you to start now if you can. December 6th when things open, because waiting to January, you might be busy with other tasks. And then you'll schedule your pre-assessment review call during those windows. Again, it's all kind of staggered based on when you start. So individual dates will be set up with your representative, but you have the general timelines here. Next slide. Prior to your PRC call, you have a couple tasks that need to happen before you start. So one is to get set up in the system, and then the 5 other tasks are reviewing demographics that have been submitted from e-filing, assigning accommodations, notifying parents and guardians, and that might, that's going to happen on the timeline it's appropriate to communicate to parents and guardians. That's up to the school schedule. Planning for the assessment, of course, is ongoing, but these are specific tasks that have explanations in the MyNAEP system. And then encouraging participation is something you're going to continue doing throughout. High participation is really critical to having data that we can interpret at the TUDA, DC, and national level. So it's really important. We have a very high level of participation this year after having a lot of years of missing data. All of these tasks except one, you can start on December 6th. The one that needs to wait is the updating the current roster with new students, and that has to happen in the new year because of the way the e-filing registration happens. We encourage you as an LEA representative to monitor your school's progress using your own MyNAEP registration ID to make sure everyone's on track. I think one thing that's really wonderful about the MyNAEP system is that there's videos to explain each of these processes really clearly, and you also have a representative you can talk to help you through. But wanted to share this information with all of you so you had a really clear window into what your schools are being asked. And pausing there, because that's kind of where we are right now with NAEP, getting ready at this very moment to prepare the tasks for registration and participation. The last thing I wanted to share today was just a resource reminder. NAEP has provided a pretty wide array of resources to help in the communication about the upcoming NAEP assessments, particularly because it's been a number of years since we've taken the assessments. So some things that might be helpful: a high-level overview of NAEP, an introduction to NAEP, a little bit different. One is a little more glossy, one's a little more weedy. Some FAQs, a parent guide, which is particularly helpful, some engagement strategies, the inclusion policies for our students with disabilities and English learners for DC, some information about the questionnaires that students get, some customizable parent notification letters, which have translated shells posted online as well right now, sample questions, and then links to both NAEP and OSSE's websites for NAEP. So pausing there, any questions you have about NAEP? Okay. Thank you, everyone. I will turn it over to Mike.
All right, thank you, Danielle. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to give you a couple of reminders and updates about our Access for ELLs and All Access for ELLs registration process for this year. So as you all know, the registration process, also known as the pre-ID file for Access and All Access, are well underway. The registration process opened on November 4th. And during this registration process, LEAs will be verifying student demographic information for those students that are taking Access, indicating required accommodations if warranted, and identifying the mode of administration, online or paper, which the students will require in order to receive the materials prior to testing. LEAs that will be using the multiple student upload file process were tasked with submitting that file to OSSE by November 29th, which is now passed. If you did not complete that file and upload it to the QuickBase application, you can still complete the registration process using the manual entry mode, and that is due by December 10th. So again, you still have time to complete your registration process. All registration must be complete for Access and All Access by December 10th. If you have questions about registration, please do not hesitate to contact me. You can reach me at michael.craig@dc.gov. Next slide. Also to remember, when you are completing your registration process, you should be referencing your accommodations manuals and any testing accommodations guidelines for the registration process. When doing so, make sure that you're considering the student's English language proficiency levels, the student's literacy in his or her native language, and background factors that impact accommodations. So your testing accommodations guides, they link to and reference all of the SEDS accommodations. So make sure that you are referencing both guides when completing the registration process for Access and All Access. Taking a moment to pause. I see there's a question. I somehow lost access to QuickBase. Does anyone have administrators' information? If you have lost access to QuickBase, the best thing, if you need the pre-ID assessment QuickBase application, you can reach out to me directly and we can provide you with support. You can also reach out to the OSSE hotline and they can support you with that as well.
Yeah, I would note that if it's general access to QuickBase broadly, put in an OST ticket. You know, that would be the fastest if you've lost access to the entire system. And then, Mike, it looks like I think Laura's hand is raised.
Hi, yes.
Hey, sorry, real quick question. So when we were comparing the two different accommodations manual, the like crosswalk that shows the SEDS accommodations versus the WIDA accommodations manual, there are definitely accommodations that like have a crosswalk with SEDS, like extended time and scribe. But there are a bunch of accommodations in the WIDA manual that don't have, you know, kind of any sort of guidance around if they have this in SEDS, they would likely qualify. Are we supposed to just like talk with our teams and determine just at the school level, at the, you know, with teachers, what is appropriate for the accommodations where there isn't a SEDS crosswalk?
So I think your IEP team should definitely be discussing what accommodations the students are using in the classroom and on tests within their school building prior to completing access. So the best option would be for your IEP teams to meet to discuss those accommodations and then reference the testing accommodations guide. If you have specific questions about those accommodations, definitely do not hesitate to contact me, but make sure that your IEP teams are discussing prior to registration about the accommodations that the students are using in the classroom.
Okay, great. And who knows, maybe our new SED system will allow us to put in access accommodations as a part of their IEP. So it's something that is just built in to their IEP process. But thank you.
No problem. Any other questions about access? All right, I'll turn it over to Stephanie.
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to speak briefly about Dynamic Learning Maps, DLM, which is our alternate science assessment. Most of the information I'm sharing, we also shared back in October, so I'll probably be going pretty quickly, but there are a number of useful links on these slides that I would encourage you to look into if you are responsible for DLM administration in your LEA. So DLM has released video and kind of supplemental resources for LEA district level folks to prepare for administering DLM in the spring of 22. The link to that resources is on this slide. There are a number of really helpful resources to get you prepared to understand what the tests look like, how they're administered, how to set up educators in DLM's portal and download the appropriate apps for test administration. So all of that is available now, and DLM will also be holding a DC specific test coordinator training webinar in January. And if you are the type of person who might benefit from more live instruction, I would encourage you to attend that webinar as well. It's a lot of the information overlaps with what's available now in those self-paced resources, but sometimes it's helpful to be able to ask questions in a live format. So that's happening on January 12th, and a follow-up question and answer session to that training will be taking place in early February. Just a note that something that's different for DLM this year is that each LEA can only designate one person in their system as the district test coordinator. And those updates have already been made. And I believe for the most part, folks who are either the district test coordinator or a non-public school coordinator should already have access to the DLM educator portal. If you fall into one of those roles and do not currently have access, please let me know by sending an email to stephanie.snyder@dc.gov, and I'll double check your access. And if you need to be added, we'll make sure that that happens. For test administrator training for DLM, that training is a self-paced module through the DLM portal, and that is also currently available. The link for DLM training is here on this slide, and test administrators who are registered with the role of teacher in the DLM portal will be automatically enrolled in this course to complete the test administrator training. That is the only required training for DLM, and it's something that without completing that training, folks will not be able to serve as test administrators for DLM. Something that may be different for those of you who have served in the DLM test administrator role previously is that usually there are two different trainings. There's one for new test administrators and one for returning test administrators. This year, because DC has not administered DLM in a couple of years, all folks are required to take the test administrator training for new test administrators, even if you've served in that role in the past. DLM has specific time-bound requirements about the test administrator training. So all of the folks who will be serving as DLM test administrators this year are required to take the training for new administrators. I will pause here. Any questions about DLM access? Good question. Which grade levels take DLM? So DLM is our alternate science assessment. So it is required for students in grades 5 and 8 and students who are enrolled in a high school biology course. For non-publics, another good question. If test administrators completed the training for Maryland, you do not need to take it again for DC. What you can do is email me, stephanie.snyder@dc.gov, and I'll work with DLM to make sure that you are noted as having completed the training. And you do not have to do it more than once. That is a really great question. Thank you. All right, if there are no other questions, I will turn it over to Deanna to go over PARCC.
Thanks, Stephanie. So as you know from previous years, both PARCC and DC Science use a similar assessment administration platform. So we are first going to talk about the content side of things for PARCC and DC Science assessment separately. And then we will talk about the updates related to the assessment platforms for both assessments together in a section afterwards. So we can go on to the next slide. This is a reminder that PARCC stands for the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers. This assessment is aligned to the Common Core state standards and measure the knowledge and skills for ELA and math. Students in grades 3 through 8 and high school take this assessment as the general assessment, and those who, unless they are eligible for an alternate assessment. Next slide, please. So the PARCC testing times have been revised to make our assessment more efficient while also covering the depth and breadth of the standards. So we're really excited that we were able to reduce testing time. So we've become more efficient in measuring the standards, but there's the same content coverage over fewer items and in some cases fewer units. This reduction in the blueprint and testing time we hope will help with administrative burden and the impact that schools are facing in terms of their scheduling broadly. So on this slide, you can see the unit testing times for the different grade levels for the PARCC assessment. There is a more detailed assessment unit structure document as well as blueprints and evidence statements on the OSSE.dc.gov/PARCC webpage. So if you would like more detail, you can find it on our webpage. For math, field testing items are embedded in the units that you see in this table. We do want to note that for ELA, there will be an additional field test unit, and those additional field test units have been confirmed for grades 3, 6, and ELA 2, which is grade 10. So we hope that this information is helpful for you as you go through and create your testing schedules over the next couple of months. Next slide, please. I do want to note that in this slide, it still says TBD, which is an error on my part, but know that the high school additional field test unit for ELA will be grade 10 ELA 2 and grades 3 and 6. This page is a synthesis of all of the different assessment resources for PARCC. That includes the standards, the evidence tables, blueprints, released items, practice tests. All of that can be found as links on this slide. So I see that there is a question in the chat. It says, does that mean there will be 3 units for ELA 2? That is correct. So for math, there will not be an additional unit because all field tested items will be embedded in the existing units. But for ELA, grades 3, 6, and 10, or ELA 2, will have a 3rd unit. We also want to note that it could be any unit. For those grades, there will be 3 units instead of 2, and one of those units will be the field testing unit. Yes, I see your comment about including the field test units in the chart. I will make sure that we update it. We do want to acknowledge that the operational units are 2 units, so we do not want to change the number there, but we will certainly very clearly notate exactly which grade levels have the additional field testing units before we post this slide and the recording of this presentation to the NGA meetings webpage on the assessment webpage. Are there any other questions related to content? Yes, this information will be in the test coordinator manuals and test administrator manuals this year, including the details about the field tests. I see a question that says, I thought field test items were mixed into all units. That is true for math. So for math, the field test units are embedded within the math units that you saw on that slide. For ELA, it has been an additional unit for field testing since there are complete passage sets and items related to those passage sets. It has to be a separate unit for field testing. Any other questions?
Deanna, did we respond, sorry, to Dominique's question about the TCM?
I believe so, but I will say this again. The information around field testing and all of the details that we've described will be both in the test coordinator manuals and test administrator manuals this year, including the field test information. And those manuals will be available when PAN opens on January 5th. And we'll talk more about PAN and TestNav and more of those administrative pieces after we cover the content side of the DC Science assessment. So we do have a couple more updates for you. With that, I'll pass it over to Stephanie to talk about DC Science assessment.
Thank you, Deanna. And as Deanna mentioned, DC Science administration-wise is very much parallel to PARCC, but I just wanted to go over a few content-related things related to DC Science. So the slide here shows the grades and courses that are assessed by the DC Science assessment. And like DLM, DC Science is administered to students in grades 5, 8, and students enrolled in a high school biology course. This slide is showing some of the resources that are available for DC Science to help educators familiarize themselves with the assessment and the expectations of the standards. So there's performance level descriptors, there are item writing specifications, the blueprints are here as well. One relatively new resource that we just wanted to highlight is the classroom assessment guides, which give a little bit more information about what the NGSS, the Next Generation Science Standards, can look like in classroom assessment and in practice to allow folks to understand the connections between the standards and assessment. And there's sample items and really great resources in those classroom assessment guides. So I would encourage you and science educators in your schools to really take a look at those, and they're a really great professional development resource. These resources are all located at the link that you see here on the slide. It's the DC Pearson support site. And all of the resources are on that page, in addition to explanatory videos of the resources. So each kind of has an introductory video explaining what the resource is and how to use it, as well as the resource itself. And yes, we will put that in the chat. Any other questions about DC Science? All right, I'll pass it back over to Deanna to talk about the registration process for both PARCC and DC Science.
Thanks, Stephanie. And I'll also say that as soon as this meeting concludes and the recording is ready, we will be submitting an update to our webpage so that you can access all of these links, because there are quite a few, and you can review this recording if you need to revisit any information. So now we're going to talk specifically around the test administration updates that are relevant to both PARCC and DC Science, given that both of these assessments use the same testing platforms. One thing I want to highlight about the section of information that we're going to cover is twofold. First, a lot of this information you are going to see when you complete the test security training modules. We go over this information in those trainings as well. And in addition to that, if you choose to opt in to the trainings that we reviewed on the assessment training schedule earlier in today's presentation, we will also go into more detail around the logistics for these pieces of information. We want to make sure that you are fully supported in your role. So as a reminder, PARCC is taken annually in students grades 3 through 8 and for certain high school courses. When it comes to the high school courses, we encourage you to review the statewide assessment participation and performance policy for those specific assessments. DC Science is taken in grades 5, 8, and in students enrolled in high school biology courses. Next slide, please. So for PARCC and DC Science, registration aligns to either the student's grade or their course. So OSSE will pre-register all students in grades 3 through 8 for the PARCC assessments. OSSE also will pre-register all students in grades 5 and 8 for the DC Science assessment. LEAs during the registration process, which will begin when PAN opens in January, will verify the PARCC and DC Science registrations for grades 3 through 8 and make any adjustments that they need to make in grades 7 and 8 if there are students taking advanced high school mathematics courses. LEAs, however, so while OSSE pre-registers grades 3 through 8, LEAs register all students all high school students for PARCC and DC Science because that's not based on grade, that's based on course enrollment, and your school is going to know which assessment is suited for each student based off of the course enrollment information that you have. Next slide, please. While we shared this in the October NGA meeting, and this information is in our manuals and in the test security training modules, we do want to emphasize that this year we will be implementing some feedback that we received around student registration for PARCC and DC Science from you all. And that feedback was that having the same due date for both LEAs and non-public schools created a situation where non-public schools were not able to put in the personal needs profile information for students in time because they were the same deadline for both types of organizations. So this year, there are going to be staggered deadlines for student registration. LEAs will complete the student registration and personal needs profile by February 16th. This will allow non-public schools between February 16th and their due date on February 22nd to meet with special education teams and complete the personal needs profile for students registered at LEAs but attending non-public schools. We have more information about the role of non-public schools in test security and administration. It can be found once again on the Test Coordinator Resources webpage and is linked on this slide for your reference. On the next slide, we will talk more specifically about the timing for registration. So prior to January 5th is the date that Pearson Access Next, also known as PAN, is scheduled to open. Prior to that date, OSSE registers students in grades 3 through 8 for the PARCC and DC Science assessment. From January 5th to February 16th, LEAs will confirm registration for grades 3 through 8 and also complete the registration for high school students based on their course enrollment. During this time, LEAs will also complete the accommodations in the personal needs profile or the PNP. And then non-public schools, once LEAs have completed those registrations, will be able to go in from between February 16th and February 22nd to complete the PNP profiles for students attending the non-public schools. It's really important that prior to submitting school test security plans that you've completed the student accessibility features in the personal needs profile. And it's also important that before you're submitting your school test security plan that you've created test sessions for the various student groups. I heard a couple of pings come through the chat, so I'm going to pause here for a moment. Will the SRP&P field definitions doc come out January 5th or before? That is a great question, Dominique. It will. As soon as it is updated and available, I'm going to discuss some updates that we're making with you in just a few slides. We will be sharing it through the NGA bulletin so that you can have it as soon as possible, but it will be also posted under the documentation section of PAN as well. So we do want to get that to you as soon as possible because we know that it's helpful for your planning. And Danielle, do you want to take the question about medically exempt students?
Yeah, absolutely. So all students who are enrolled in courses with required assessments should be on your roster. If a student has a medical exemption specific to testing because of a medical emergency, so like the traditional testing medical exemption, you would use a non-tested code there for medical exemption. If a student has a distance learning exemption because they're participating in distance learning, those students are required, and they do not have a testing medical exemption, those students are required to participate in in-person testing. And so a little bit later in the presentation, we're going to give a reminder about that, but LEAs and schools have some options to consider when they think about ways in which they want to bring in those students. Some schools and LEAs are considering an alternate testing site. Some schools and LEAs may consider testing earlier in the morning or later in the evening upon approval or on an alternate day. So we have some options for that that we'll talk about a little bit later, but that you are encouraged to reach out to us with some of those questions. We've been working with some of you on that, and all of this must be included and approved in your school test security plan. But yes, they should be included in your SRP&P because they are required testers. Kyrion, can you tell me the acronym? Is this homebound? Sorry, I see Kyrion your question. Okay. So an approval letter, physical verification, if they're bound to, sorry, things are moving a little bit, home and hospital bound students, be used in lieu of the OSSE assessment medical exemption form. Let me take a look at that, and we can talk about that and share that in the NGA bulletin if there's an update there. If you can send a copy of that, or I apologize, I don't usually work with that approval form. I'll take a look and we can see what that looks like for the medical exemption form for testing. But we want to make sure that these forms are treated separately. But we'll talk about that one offline. Good question.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you all for your questions. These are great questions, and I'm sure that as you ask them, it is not just helping you, but helping others in this space as well. So thank you for your questions. One last thing to note here is that in terms of granting access to PAN, we will be granting access to Pearson Access Next to all of the people who submitted the form that was due on October 18th and were identified as PARCC and DC Science LEA test coordinators. If at any point that point of contact changes, please resubmit the form and email us so that we know that that information has been updated. And you can email us at osse.assessment@dc.gov. All right, next slide. As stated before, Pearson Access Next is scheduled to open to LEAs on January 5th, 2022. That is the Wednesday after many of us will be returning from our winter break. The following updates are updates that we shared in October, so I'm going to go over them quickly. There is going to be a PAN critical warning flag update. Fields that are not required by OSSE will no longer have warnings associated with missing information, so hopefully that helps as you go through your student registration process. PAN will also be limiting the number of assignment of tests to avoid duplicate assignments of the same test form. In October, there was a question specifically around what if one student is registered for 2 different assessments as opposed to 2 of the same assessments. In that case, the flag would not be given. So it's really important to still make sure that we're doing our due diligence to avoid duplicates, but hopefully this feature will be helpful. There will also be an option for mass deletions of empty test sessions within PAN, and we are going to be updating the dashboards to include some helpful school and LEA level users with an overview of administration progress so that you can see that. Yes, this webinar is being recorded. It This webinar and all of the NGA meetings can be accessed at the OSSE assessment webpage on the Next Generation Assessments meeting page. We will also be sharing the direct link to that page in the chat, which Stephanie just did, but you will also have a link to that in the upcoming NGA bulletin. After every NGA meeting, we share out this link so that you can refer back to the information that we're presenting, because we acknowledge that it is dense. All right, next slide, please. So as a reminder, the student testing platform for PARCC and DC Science is TestNav 8. The features of TestNav 8 will remain consistent from previous years. And the test administration platform is Pearson Access Next, which we often refer to as PAN. We do want to pause here and name that how PAN will look for users will be slightly different, although the functionalities will remain the same. So, for example, at the top where it says New PAN Display, you'll see that there's a drop-down it says Setup, and testing and reports all of the information that you see in the previous PAN display. But instead of it being on the home page, it's going to be a drop down so that you can more easily toggle between these different aspects of PAN. Before, you had to go back to the home page and it required some additional clicks. So we're hoping that this new drop down feature will once again help ease the burden a little bit and make it a little more user friendly as you go through the test administration process. Next slide, please. So an updated version of the TestNav 8 application is available. There will be an inactivity timer set at 20 minutes. So if a student is not registering any activity, typing or scrolling for 20 minutes, they will be logged out of the system and their test will need to be resumed and they'll need to sign back in. And while we had mentioned in the past when we were planning for remote administration, which is not taking place this year, there will not be any auto resume feature. So it will be the same as in previous years, where if a student is exited from an assessment, the test administrator will need to resume the assessment in Pearson Access Next, and then the student will need to sign back in. So for us, this should be consistent with previous years. Next slide, please. So another piece of feedback that we received over the summer was that the process of inputting the personal needs profile and navigating all of the different documents to put in accommodations and accessibility features was quite cumbersome for LEA test coordinators. So we thought really strategically and worked with our vendors on how we could ease the burden. So to assist with this, we are updating some of our documents with you in mind. So the first document that Michael already went over are the testing accommodations guides. If you could click, we will see those guides. These are the two guides from the previous slide. These testing accommodations guides have been slightly updated. So if you click again, within the testing accommodations guide, this table here is what you see when you open it up and you're looking to, make the determinations in SEDS for the various assessments. If you click again, you'll notice that we have added a box here at the bottom for each of the accommodations. And what that says, I know you probably cannot read it from here, but it says SRP&P Field Definitions Guide Reference. And so for each of these rows within the testing accommodations guide, there's going to be a reference to the SRP&P Field Definitions Guide. If we click again, we'll show what that looks like. So this information can also be found. The image that just popped up is the table that is in the Field Definitions Guide. So this information, in this case, it's BD, can be found in this very first column of the Field Definitions Guide. So if you click again, it will show that this information in the OSSE Testing Accommodations Guide matches with this very first column within the SRP&P Field Definitions Guide. Similarly, we wanted to make sure we were cross-referencing in both directions, so we've also added a column at the end. Originally, there was only a column that referenced the Accessibility Features and Accommodations Manual for PARCC and DC Science, which is that second to last column. We have added another column that references the OSSE Testing Accommodations Guide. So if we click again, you'll see that this row here matches the row within the Testing Accommodations Guide. So all of that to say, we have been really strategic in updating both the Testing Accommodations Guide, or tags, so that they have references to the SRP&P Field Definitions Guide, and that the SRP&P Field Definitions Guide has very clear references to the tags. Our goal in this, although it sounds very complicated, is to make this less of a scavenger hunt. That was a word that you all used in some of the interviews we had over the summer, and make the whole process more clear. By no means is this one slide meant to make you feel proficient and fluent with this process. We will be having a training that's on the schedule in January around this process specifically, how to input accommodations, and we will be giving more details around this process as well. Finally, the last note is that the 7th edition of the Accessibility Features and Accommodations Manuals is going to be available at the same time as the Test Coordinator Manual and the Test Administrator Manual, and those will all be posted at dc.mypearsonsupport.com/manuals. That was a lot of information. We wanted to give you an overview of some of the changes that are being made. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, but please also know that we will be incorporating all of these details into future trainings when this information is more relevant to your practice. We acknowledge that PAN is not open yet, so revisiting all of these updates will be important for our February NGA meeting and for the trainings that take place between now and that February NGA meeting. When did you say the accommodations training will be held? That is a great question. I have the testing training schedule up here. Looking at the testing training schedule, the PARCC and DC Science Assessment Accommodations webinar is January 20th from 10 to 11:30 a.m. And you can register using the registration link on the Test Coordinator Resources page under the testing training schedule. Yes, great question. So the PARCC manuals will be released when PAN opens on January 5th. The Field Definitions Guide, the SRP&P template, and the 7th edition of the AF&A manuals will also be released on January 5th, but we will also be sharing them in the an NGA bulletin as soon as they're available, so that you can use them as soon as they're available. So to answer your question, they will be in Pearson Access Next on January 5th and in NGA bulletins as soon as possible. The link I just chatted was the direct link to this year's assessment training schedule for your reference. That direct link you can access from the Test Coordinator Resources page. Any other questions? If not, we can move on to the next slide. Great, so an overview of some manual, the updates to the AF&A manuals. The 7th edition will be released to LEAs on January 5th, and if it is available sooner, we will let you know through NGA bulletins. And some updates between the 6th edition to the 7th edition are outlined on this slide. So one is that it adds information about DC Science, including specifying if an accommodation is available for PARCC, DC Science, or for both assessments. It also updates the links to external resources. It updates the audio guidelines to reflect the ability to adjust the volume during testing. It updates guidance on transcription of Braille and large print for the DC Science tests, and it adds information about using the co-writer and reader extensions. I see a question in the chat. Have test codes been changed for 21-22? Are you referring to the naming conventions, or can you speak more around what you're referring to?
Hi, Deanna, thanks. Yes, I know last year, oh, okay, Stephanie just answered it. Okay. I just know last year there was some formatting issues with the codes that were being used for the tests in PARCC. So I was just curious, but it looks like they're going back to what they were in 1920, if I'm reading Stephanie's comment correctly.
That is correct. And the specific information around that is currently available in that test coordinator resources guide that I referred to right at the beginning of the session. We have those details outlined in there. But yes, that was frustrating in last year, and it will go back to how it was and hopefully be easier for all of us.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. All right, next slide, please. So in addition to the content resources that we saw on the previous slides for PARCC and the content resources for DC Science, this slide has the resources specifically for test administration for both PARCC and DC Science. The first link is the test coordinator resources page. If only I could have a dime for every time I have said that in this training. It really should be, as much as possible, the one-stop shop for all of you. And the test coordinator and resources manuals will be available online when PAN opens on January 5th. The TestNav 8 user guide information and the download for the practice tests and the TestNav 8 download, those are all available currently and are also linked on this slide. I will pause for just a couple more seconds. We were able to answer a lot of questions, but just in case there are any other questions, we're happy to address them. And if not, I will pass it back over to Danielle.
I see a question from Victoria. It's going to be a Deanna or Stephanie question, but I'll read it. Do we know when secure materials and TA manuals will be delivered to schools in March?
They will be delivered in March, is the information that we have. And there will be an option to, one, if you don't want paper manuals, if you're like me and you're very environmentally conscious and that's aligned to your school and your LEA, you will have the option this year in PAN to choose not to receive paper manuals. This is totally optional, and the default will be for schools to receive them. That being said, the digital copies of the test coordinator manual and the test administrator manual, they will be available when PAN opens. Oh, thank you, Stephanie, for that more specific answer. Materials are expected to arrive between March 16th and 21st.
And we have one more question about if you are able to print the manuals online, you can print them, and you could print just the scripts if you wanted to. Absolutely.
Yes, that is completely okay to do.
Great. Any other questions about admin prep? Okay, just a couple quick reminders about policy. Most of this we've already touched on already, and the policy's been out for a while, but just some release policy reminders, links to them. When we get the PDFs posted online, you'll see them. But wanted to remind everyone that this fall we did release the 3 major policies for this year's assessment season. The first being the statewide assessments participation and performance policy. That, of course, has all the information you need about required assessments, who takes it, what exceptions there are, what exceptions there aren't, how it relates to the calculation of participation, and how it relates to the calculation of performance. This is very consistent with previous years. the note we raised was about in-person testing as opposed to remote testing. We also released the test security guidelines and supporting resources on that page we shared earlier. A reminder as you're getting ready to prepare for your school test security plan and for training that the test security guidelines are our foundational document. So the place to go to talk and to look through your roles and responsibilities. The key information will be in the training, but the guidelines are our foundational document. We also, as Mike mentioned, posted the testing accommodations guides. So please just make sure that your key staff members who are working on testing are aware of these policies and trained as appropriate. Any questions you have, please reach out to us. So someone asked this question earlier. Oh, there's a question I'll pause for before we get into this slide. If a certificate student was first-time 11th grader in 2019-20 or 2020-21, but they take an English class each year, do they need to take the 11th grade MSAA this year? Let me see if I can read that again. The first-time 11th grader, if they are coded as taking 11th grade, they should take the MSAA assessment in 11th grade. Mike, do you want to chime into that too?
That is correct, but it also, we need to determine if the student has been determined eligible for alternate assessment participation. A certificate student does not automatically mean that. So this is from Dawn. If you could reach out to me directly and I can verify that the student has been determined eligible for alternate assessment participation, that would be great.
And Joe, there's another, sorry, Mike, there's another question for you, Joe.
What is the platform for it? It's msaassessments.org. But additional information will be released in upcoming NGA meetings about MSAA and the trainings that will take place for MSAA. Trainings for MSAA will not take place until March.
And MSAA has its own unique platform.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so just a reminder, we spoke of earlier about in-person testing this year. So we are having all of our students participate in in-person testing this year, and all students enrolled in courses with required assessments are expected to participate with the traditional exceptions, and that is if a student has approved medical exemption for testing. So again, not the distance learning exemption, but if a student has a medical emergency, is not able to participate in testing, they would need to submit that and get OSSE approval to be exempt. Students who are recently arrived English learners are exempt from participating in the ELA assessment for 1 year only. And then they are exempt from performance reporting in science and mathematics. Other than that, all students who are in required courses are required to participate. If you have students who are in a distance learning setting, we will work with you to help think through reasonable accommodations to test those those students in person safely. I mentioned earlier that there are some schools who are considering having an alternate site to test their students. Some may choose to bring their students into the buildings with other students as appropriate, may want slightly earlier windows or later testing times or alternate days. If you do want to think through this for your virtual students, please talk with us, because if they do not have a medical exemption for testing, they are required to participate, and we want to support you in that. So do reach out to us earlier rather than later. All that information should be included in your school test security plan, and we'll be able to work through that process with you. So just to, I see a question has been answered in the chat about the previous question, the deadline for the appeals window for alternate assessment eligibility, and that's December 17th, as Mike said. What happens if we have to quarantine a grade band during our expected testing time, and it would fall outside the testing window? It's a really good question. A couple things we have tried to do to help mitigate the possibility of quarantining, which certainly might happen. We hope it doesn't, but we are going in with eyes wide open. We have first made sure that there are no restrictions on your testing window, right? You don't have to do 30 consecutive days, you have the entire window. Because of some of the kind of remaining uncertainty at this time, we do recommend you test earlier in the testing window and build yourself in a really robust makeup window, right? If you're waiting to the very last couple weeks, those students would be counted as non-participants if they don't finish. And what we want to do is ensure that students have the best possibility of completing testing. So we expanded the window and let the window kind of stay open to anyone who needs it. And we do encourage you to build in a really robust makeup window. So that's how we're handling that. Not ideal, of course, but that's the kind of parameters we have. Good question, thanks. Mike.
Sure, thanks, Danielle. So just another quick policy reminder that the testing accommodations guide for 21-22 are now available. You have your testing accommodation guide for students with disabilities, English learners, and accessibility features and administrative considerations for all students. All three guides are available on the OSSE website. They provide accommodation, an overview of accommodations, accessibility features, and administrative considerations for students that will be participating in assessments this school year, as well as a crosswalk that aligns with our accommodations available in SEDS. Like Deanna mentioned earlier, we've done updates to the assessment accommodation guides to reference the SRPNP. So make sure that you are referencing these accommodations guides when completing your registration process for all assessments. And all guides can be found on the OSSE website. Next slide. All right, so we're going to spend a little time just give you reminders about the alternate assessment eligibility process and the determinations and appeals process. Next slide. So as you know, the alternate assessment eligibility determinations are now available for the 21-22 school year. Determinations can be found in SEDS, CLIC, and QuickBase. These are your final eligibility determinations for students that OSSE deemed eligible for alternate assessment participation. After reviewing these determinations, if your IEP team feels that an appeal is warranted for any determination made by OSSE, you may do so by uploading additional information to SEDS, and OSSE will review that information to review the appeal process. Prior to that, you must initiate the appeal process through the alternate assessment MSAA QuickBase application, which you all should have access to. And in there, you will initiate the appeal process and provide additional information about the student that you're appealing for. The appeals window runs from November 22nd through December 17th, and that will again be performed through the alternate assessment MSA QuickBase application, and you will receive your determinations in SEDS as well. All final determinations for appeals will be in SEDS on January 10th. So again, just a reminder that if you are making an appeal for any determination made by OSSE, you must upload additional supporting information. So that supporting documentation can look like a new psychological educational evaluations, student work samples, any testing results that verifies and determines that the student has a significant cognitive disability. Again, this is your IEP team's chance to provide us with as much information as possible to determine that the student has a significant cognitive disability. So also providing a narrative about the student will be helpful when making that determination. So again, you have until December 17th to make any appeal if warranted, and that will be performed through the MSA Alternate Assessment QuickBase application. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to take I think there's a question in the chat. A question about students wearing masks. The speaking portion of the access test. One specialist was concerned that. So there's a question about students wearing a mask during the speaking test on Access Assessment. So Access has provided information. They've just given guidance around that and encourage our students and testing coordinators and test administrators to work with their students to enunciate, speak clearly. I know that it may be an additional barrier for some students. We will look into that and gain further guidance and just additional information from Access to see if they have any additional recommendations. But again, having your students speak as clearly as possible, even when they're in the classroom, what steps your schools and teachers are taking to working with students while they are in class and using the mask as well. So I think we would just recommend following the same guidelines. any additional questions about access or alternate assessment registration, alternate assessment eligibility determinations? All right.
Thanks, Mike. We'll now be transitioning from policy reminders into some kind of miscellaneous updates and resources that we want to share with you all because they may be helpful. The first resource that we want to share with you is the comprehensive literacy plan that OSSE put out a couple of months ago. So within this document that is linked within this slide, there is a full comprehensive literacy plan. And the goal of the comprehensive literacy plan is to move the district, its schools, its early childhood programs, and educators to a reality where all learners receive effective literacy instruction and evidence-based interventions they need to be successful. So, as a part of this plan, the OSSE assessment team put together the chapter on comprehensive assessment and progress monitoring. We encourage you as assessment points of contact to check out this chapter. We think that there's a really great opportunity here for us to start to norm and standardize the language that we're using when it comes to assessment. And it could be helpful as educational leaders at your LEAs to have a better sense of the full vision of OSSE when it comes to assessment and progress monitoring. So this is totally optional, but we did put this together, and we would love for it to be a resource that is used as a part of the assessment literacy initiatives that you may be doing at your LEAs and schools, and really help us all come together with some normed, standardized language as we talk about assessments and we build buy-in from stakeholders at all levels. So we just wanted to let you know that this was available, and we encourage you to check it out. For our next update, I'm going to pass it over to Stephanie.
Thank you, Deanna. I just wanted to share, in the vein of innovation and thinking new ways of thinking about assessment, an opportunity that OSSE is exploring to provide an interim assessment in English language arts and math to LEAs at no cost. This interim assessment would be the Pearson Transcend assessment, and it is run on the same platform as the PARCC and DC Science summative assessments. It's the TestNav platform. And this interim opportunity would be currently available for grades 3 through 8. They're expanding to grades K through 2 in the next school year. The Transcend assessments are interim assessments. They would be administered 3 times per year, similar to interim assessments that your LEAs may currently be using. They're computer delivered, again, on the TestNav platform, and include the same accessibility features and accommodations that are available on the PARCC and DC Science summative assessments. One innovation of note for Transcend assessments is that in being attentive to local curriculum and scope and sequence, LEAs do have the opportunity to select which standards are assessed on each of the 3 interim assessments for Transcend. So at the OSSE level, we would lay out the full year of content standards that should be covered in a year. So it's basically the Common Core state standards for a particular grade level. And then LEAs would actually go in and select which standards they would want assessed on each of the 3 assessments. And as long as all of the standards are covered throughout the year, LEAs have the freedom and flexibility to determine when when students would see each of the standards on the interim assessments. The Pearson team will be holding a demonstration and a question and answer session on Transcend assessments in a couple of weeks on December 17th. And that will be your opportunity to come learn more about Transcend in a more eloquent way than I've just described them here, and also ask any questions you have about the format, you'll be able to see what it looks like, how folks can go in and select standards, what sample reports might look like, and ask any other additional questions. And just to reiterate, this is something that OSSE is exploring offering to LEAs at no cost to LEAs, and presents an opportunity to participate in an interim assessment that looks and feels more like summative and is reported on more connected to the summative. It's not the same scale, but the items are similar, and there is a scale score that would be reported for transcend assessments, and it's just something that can bring interim assessment closer to what students may experience on the summative. But again, just plugging that December 17th, Pearson will be providing a demonstration of that. I see a question in the chat, figure this would come up about data. So timeline for when results from Transcend would be shared with schools is something that Pearson can give more information about, but I believe their results are delivered pretty much immediately to schools. From an OSSE perspective, we do not anticipate receiving those performance results from schools. The kind of impetus behind OSSE providing interims, a common interim across LEAs, is to get a better understanding of whether transitioning in the future to a more balanced assessment system statewide is viable and something that schools are interested in. So from the OSSE perspective, our interest in providing Transcend is just really to understand participation patterns of which LEAs and schools may be interested in participating, and which grade levels are participating, and understanding LEA's desires across the district of moving in this more common balanced assessment system direction. But performance information would be shared with schools and LEAs, and Pearson would also likely be using that information to perform studies to better understand the connections between performance on the interims and on the summative assessments. Danielle, was there something else you'd like to add?
No, I thought so, but I think you covered it. The only other thing I'd say is that if LEs or schools are interested in doing this, a very clear data sharing agreement would be drafted. OSSE, these data are really important at the school and LEA level and not at the state level. Right, we said that really clearly in the CEP report, that a standardized statewide summative assessment is what we're able to use at the state level. We believe interims serve a critical purpose at school on a daily level. So we believe in the fidelity of that data for all of you. We know that there's really people might be interested in the predictive nature of it. So some research might need to happen at the Pearson level, but we'd be really clear on where the data live and that it's your data.
So yes, encourage you to register for the demonstration at the link that Deanna provided in the chat, and it also went out in the NGA bulletin earlier this week. And if you do have additional questions in the meantime, please feel free to email them to me at stephaniesnyder@dc.gov. I'm going to turn it back over to Deanna to talk about technical assistance.
Thank you. So we began with talking about the opportunity for support through office hours and receiving technical assistance on specific topics. And I want to close this out with revisiting that. So on the next slide, you will see more detail. This was shared in this week's NGA bulletin, but we also want to present it to you all. So if you are at the LEA level, or you are at a non-public school and you're an assessment point of contact, you can sign up to meet with the OSSE assessment team if you're running into any challenges. When you go to the link that's on this slide, you will see an option to select a specific topic that is most closely aligned to the questions that you have. When you select a topic, there are staff from OSSE that are assigned to that specific topic. So if you're having trouble figuring out which topic to select, you can email us at osse.assessment@dc.gov and we can help point you in the right direction. Once again, if you're an LEA assessment manager, LEA test coordinator, or non-public school test coordinator, you can sign up for these office hours. We just ask that you please include the specific topics and the specific questions that you have so that we can be respectful of your time and come completely prepared to answer your questions. If you ever have one-off questions, though, just know that you don't have to sign up for office hours. You can email us with your questions at osse.assessment@dc.gov at any time, and we'd be happy to give you assistance via email as well. So this in no means is a replacement of that, but is something in addition to the supports that are already in place. One final flag is that we would just say to make sure that you've completed the checklist that we talked about in the earlier slides, one of those being to make sure that you're looking over the full test coordinator resources page before coming to office hours, just in case we can get that question answered for you more efficiently than you having to wait to meet with us. So we look forward to seeing you for these office hours, and you can sign up at this link. It is also in the NGA bulletin this past week and will be in the NGA bulletin this upcoming week as well. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them, but if not, I will pass it back over to Stephanie, who will go over our closing.
Thanks, Deanna. I'm looking at the in the chat question for several of us, I think, capturing upcoming relevant assessment dates in December. I can't speak to the access date, but the new PARCC coordinator and DC Science training is scheduled for December 14th. Accommodation or alternate eligibility appeals are due on December 17th, and the Pearson Transcend demonstration is also on December 17th. Mike, do you have any information about access?
Yeah. As far as access, the multiple student upload file, that deadline has passed, but you can still register students using the manual process in the QuickBase application up until March 10th. And if you have questions about that, just reach out to me directly if you need assistance with the registration process.
Thank you. I think you said March 10th, but it's December 10th, right?
Sorry, December 10th.
Okay, thanks. Yes, a week from tomorrow.
Correct.
All right. Want to just say thank you all for bearing with us. I know it's been a pretty long meeting. And yes, Nadia, that list is all of the upcoming dates in December. Want to just say thank you all for hanging in there with us for a pretty long meeting. I know there's a lot of information and links that have been thrown at you, and we just want to make sure that you have what you need before we kind of take a break for the holidays, and won't see you again until February when a lot of this will be in action. So one last plug to please send in or sign the sign-in sheet if you have not yet done that. Mike will drop the link in the chat one more time. And this last section is really a closing to talk about upcoming meetings and ways that you can get in touch with us, and we will be reaching out to you. So we have set tentative dates for all of the NGA meetings for the rest of this school year. Those are listed here. All of the test coordinator trainings and other trainings are available on that test coordinator resources webpage. And that's really, as Deanna said, kind of your one-stop shop to find all of the resources that you may need to prepare for test administration. NGA meetings for the rest of this year are currently planned to be virtual, and we will send meeting agendas usually around a week before the meeting, but this slide gives you information at a high level about what we anticipate will be covered through the topics that we believe will be covered through each of those meetings. As mentioned, there are several ways to keep in contact with us between NGA meetings. There's office hours, which Deanna just went over. We do have several training events scheduled between now and February, and that training schedule is available on that test coordinator resources page. Specifically coming up is the first of 2 trainings for new PARCC and DC Science coordinators, which will give an overview of Pearson Access Next, the system that is used for test management. Though that session, the first one is December 14th, and there will be a repeat session, so you don't have to go to both, but there will be another opportunity to get that information in January. But again, if you do have any questions in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to us at OSSE.assessment@dc.gov. Another plug for the NJ Bulletin, which I think we've mentioned a lot throughout this meeting. It is really the best resource to keep up to date on what's happening in the world of assessment, what's upcoming, what's due, and folks assigned to the roles that you see here in eSchool Plus will automatically get that NJ Bulletin, which comes out approximately every other week. And if you are a non-public coordinator, you can email us at OSSE.assessment to get added to that distribution list. Before I pause for questions, I'll pause for questions now, and feel free to please drop them in the chat, and if you'd like to come off mute, you can do that as well. Noting that you do not have access to PAN. Correct. So the meeting on December 14th is before PAN opens, but a lot of the content of that training has screenshots and step-by-step instructions for PAN that will be useful when that does open up and you're able to go in. So the training on the 14th will be a little bit theoretical, but hopefully will provide a good foundation for you to be able to go in and understand PAN when it does open in January.
Yeah, Stephanie, one thing that I'll add is that there are 2 options for that training. There's the one on December 14th, but then there's a second option after PAN opens on January 13th. So keep in mind that if you would prefer to have that training after PAN opens, that there are 2 options for that training.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if you all can hear Deanna in my microphone because we are sitting basically right next to each other. But the last thing I do want to say is I apologize, there are sirens in the background. This slide has a list of a lot of the main pages and access or resources to access for the different assessments that we do have. It has our OSSE main assessment page as well as links to all of the specific assessments so that you have them all in one place. The final thing I would like to say before we close out this meeting is somewhat of a sad note. Wanted to keep you all updated on some staffing changes here at OSSE. Deanna Santoro will be leaving the OSSE team in early January for very exciting new adventures elsewhere. And I think that in her time here, she has done amazing things, and we will definitely miss her and wish her all of the best. And in the meantime, if you do need support specifically for things that Deanna was responsible for, like PARCC, please do reach out to me, stephanie.snyder@dc.gov, or the main OSSE assessment email, which is ossie.assessment@dc.gov. Would you like to say anything, Deanna?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. I really enjoyed my time over this past year. If the exciting news is that I'm relocating abroad. I will still be around as a person, so I hope that we keep in touch. You can email me at deanna.santoro@dc.gov, and I will still be around until January 4th. So I'm here to support, and I am so incredibly grateful for you all and for the assessment team. This has been one of the most incredible teams I've ever had the opportunity to work with. I cannot speak more highly about every single team member. So thank you, Stephanie, for the kind words, and thank you all for making this past year really wonderful.
So thank you all for hanging in there with us for almost 2 hours. We appreciate your time this afternoon, and we will be posting this presentation as well as the recording probably within the next couple of days, and we'll send out some additional follow-ups in the NGA bulletin next week. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.